to start recording.
Hold on, don't
And
start
then you have
recording
the
yet.
recorder right below. Okay.
All right, thanks for joining us, everybody.
Swap over.
We are just about to get started,
Hold on. Just.
even though I've said that 3 times. I really mean it this time. Okay.
Now you got it.
Out the front. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We have a great lineup of 2 speakers from the city of St. Paul today. I'll let them introduce themselves and their topics of how they are helping us understand better what's going on in Lafayette Park, both for street improvements and bike and walkability. Ruben, please take it away.
Thank you. I want to say thanks to Melissa for helping to organize this. It's always great to get out of the office and talk to some folks about upcoming projects and about some policy directions we're heading as a city. My name is Ruben Collins. I'm in the Transportation Planning and Safety Division. I'm here with Faye Seimer as well. She'll introduce herself in a bit. We're going to tag team this presentation a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about some specific projects that are coming up in the area that are relevant to NPCA employees and other folks in the area. And Faye's going to talk about some pedestrian planning efforts we have going on. This slide we're looking at here is the Department of Public Works 5-year capital plan. This is a list of all capital projects that we have that we're anticipating within the next 5-year horizon. So there's a lot of detail on here. It's organized by year, and it's organized within that. It's also organized by funding source. And so I know I don't expect you to be able to read all of the fine print here. I did bring some paper copies of this if anyone wants to take one with you. It's a great date night activity to peruse through it and see what's coming up. But this is the document that will tell you which streets are getting reconstructed, which are going to get overlaid, and where our major capital and maintenance dollars are going to be going in the city for the next 5 years. This is a relatively new document for us to have. As a public works department, we only created our first 5-year plan just a couple years ago now. And it's been a really important tool to help us be more transparent about how we're investing and where we're investing. Specifically, there are a couple projects on here that I wanted to talk about today. And those are shown on this map. There are 2 capital projects that are kind of very near to this location here. There's the Lafayette Road Bridge Rehabilitation Project that's shown here in green. It's the bridge over the railroad tracks. And then in red is Tedesco Street reconstruction. Both of these projects are tentatively planned for the 2020 horizon. That's a little bit of a guess at this point. That means we have the funding program for 2020, and we think those projects will happen in 2020. There are all sorts of factors that need to fall in line. So those dates can slide a little bit. Projects never slide forward, they only slide backwards. But right now we're anticipating these are 2020 projects. The Tedesco Street reconstruction in particular is federally funded, which means it comes with a lot of paperwork that goes along with receiving those federal funds, and sometimes that impact project timelines. Lafayette Road Bridge Rehabilitation Project. This bridge is 450 feet long. It was constructed in 1969. It was overlaid in 1983. And it bridges over 2 railroad tracks. It's a fairly long bridge as far as bridges go in the city of St. Paul. And this is a bridge rehabilitation project. So it's not full reconstruction, it's rehabilitation. The difference is that means most of the columns or piers underneath the bridge will probably remain in place more or less in the current positions, and there'll be probably some repair work done to them. They won't be fully replaced, but every part of the bridge that you see from when you're on top of the bridge will all be replaced. What that does mean is that we're sort of limited on the width of the bridge. However wide the bridge is today, sometimes we can eke out a few more feet, or sometimes even just a few inches of additional width on the bridge, but we won't have the opportunity to completely rethink the total bridge width. But I think there will still be some opportunity to do some exciting things. The bridge was originally constructed as a 4-lane undivided roadway. That means there's 2 lanes in each direction, there's no median in the middle. we really try not to build streets like that anymore. That was sort of that was an extremely popular design back in the 60s when this was constructed, but it's sort of fallen out of favor. The crash statistics are pretty clear that that is one of the least safe roadway configurations you can build. So we're doing our best to get away from that configuration whenever possible. This bridge was constructed with a relatively narrow 6-foot sidewalk on one side of the bridge and no sidewalk on the other side of the bridge. The railings are very narrow, or are relatively low. They don't meet modern railing heights. It's not a fun bridge to walk over. Has anyone ever walked over that bridge before? Is it comfortable? Do you feel comfortable doing it? It's just not a nice place. It's just not a nice place to be. So we will have opportunity. As I said, we don't have opportunity to adjust the overall bridge width. We do have opportunity to adjust how that width is used. So the roadway can be narrower, the sidewalk. Hopefully we'll have an opportunity to talk about sidewalk on the other side of the bridge. And the railing heights will be brought up to standards. In fact, current standards over railroad tracks require those railings to be quite high over railroad tracks. So you may be surprised in fact of how high they are. But at this point, all those conversations are in front of us about what that configuration should be, and those are the sort of conversations we would come back to this group and others in the area to figure out what that cross section should be across the bridge. Tedesco reconstruction is a full street reconstruction project. The street was partially reconstructed in 1969, partially in 1983. There's been a number of utility and other projects that have sort of chopped the roadway up over the years. It's in pretty rough shape. The cross section varies depending on where you are. Some areas it's 3 lanes, some areas it's 2. There are turn lanes that stop and start at various points. So it's not very consistent, I guess we can say. The full street reconstruction, this is kind of a list of all the things that are involved in full street reconstruction. Generally, if you can see it, it's probably going to get completely replaced. As water, and as well as all the utilities underground generally get replaced at the same time. We try really hard to coordinate with our utility partners to make sure that we don't reconstruct a street and they come back the year later and cut a big hole in it, for example. So it will mean all new water mains, stormwater, sanitary sewers, sidewalks, curb gutter, roadway, and down the list. What this means is we do have a big opportunity to discuss and decide what that cross-section should be, how wide should the street be, what should be on the street, how many lanes should there be, where should or shouldn't there be turn lanes, should or shouldn't there be bike lanes, all those types of questions. As you know, probably, that there was a pedestrian refuge island constructed here last year. That was it was constructed kind of in concert with the police department building that was constructed along the route, but there was this median put in. And this is an example of the types of safety improvements we're trying to make throughout the city. This is obviously a very low cost, low budget, just an opportunity to kind of scab something in, knowing that we're going to be here to rip it all out within a couple of years when we reconstruct the street. But this project, when this was installed, this took what was the 4-lane cross-section on the bridge that we know is not the safest cross-section, that reduced it to a 3-lane configuration. There was always kind of a median there, but it made it quite a bit wider, installed some of the ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, domes in the middle of the median to make that more intuitive for folks with visual impairments. And really did a lot to improve accessibility, particularly to the bus stops that are right there. A lot of wheelchair users in the area. So this is an example of the types of improvements we're making to streets, and an example of the type of thing we would look to do more of as part of the street reconstruction project. There are a lot of issues that we can identify along this segment. There are traffic signals. There's a traffic signal at Burr that I think is really interesting, and it seems like a fairly unintuitive location for a traffic signal to be located. So that's something we'll be looking at, verifying that you still want or need a traffic signal there. There are sidewalk gaps, as we mentioned, on the bridge. Those will hopefully get filled as part of the project. This street is on our bike plan. It's scheduled for bike lanes. So part of the process will be understanding how wide those would need to be, verifying that we have space, understanding what the trade-offs of establishing those bike lanes would be, and ultimately make a determination about whether that can be implemented as part of the project. One thing I'm excited about in particular is there are a number of T intersections, particularly at Burr, the signal. And I love T intersections on reconstruction projects, especially when there is a left turn lane. There's currently an eastbound left turn lane at Burr Street. And I love T intersections because it means that you have a left turn lane in one direction. It means that opposite direction, where there isn't a street for people to turn onto, you wind up with this unused space in the middle of the street, which is a perfect opportunity to build a pedestrian refuge island. So it's a great way to make a very sound pedestrian improvement at virtually no cost and with virtually no trade-off. So I'm glad to see there's at least one T intersection along this route. The project will kind of tie into the work that was done on Payne a year or two ago. That, as you know, that signal was completely reconstructed, so we'll likely do our best to stop our project just short and not impact any of the work that was already done there. Right at DeSoto Street, right as the street goes around that curve there's some interesting geometry where streets come in at some strange angles, and there's some very weird side streets. We'll be taking a look at that, and those present a pretty challenging pedestrian environment today. So we'll be taking a look at that, in particular asking if all of those streets still need to be there. And if so, is there a way we can realign or change that geometry to be a little bit more intuitive, a little safer for pedestrians? So those are the types of decisions we'll have to make over the coming year or two. We're just on the very starting end of these projects, so we're really just starting those conversations internally. The timeline for this is possibly as early as late this year or early next year. We'll begin the kind of preliminary conversations with some of the immediately adjacent property owners that will be impacted. This is the first of those conversations to happen. Early 2019, throughout 2019, we'll be doing community engagement, asking the community what sort of improvements you would like to see on the street. By the end of 2019, we'll really need to be working on final design, getting our final approvals from MnDOT and FHWA to move forward with the project, and hope to begin construction in spring 2020. So I think the message for now is there will be more to come. Keep your ear to the ground, and there will be more opportunities to weigh in on kind of the specifics of what the design looks like, what's part of the project, or not part of the project. So that's what I have for you today. If there are any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them.
Can you go back to the 5-year plan slide? Because I think I keep misunderstanding Lafayette Bridge MSA project, University to, so is it Sego?
Yeah, Otsego Street. So one complicating factor on this is that this is a record of what year that projects are, what year the funding is programmed for those projects. So when we see the Lafayette Bridge project show up in 2018, that's mostly design money. It costs money to work on the design and work on the front end planning for the bridge project. So that money is been programmed for 2018 to work on the design. The actual capital dollars for construction are showing up in 2019. And the capital dollars for the Tedesco Street reconstruction are showing up in 2020. So that's a good example of how the dates or the years that the funding is programmed here is not necessarily correlating with the year it actually shows up on the ground. But that's more common with bridge projects than street reconstruction projects.
So where does Lafayette end and Tedesco start?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. I think it happens right at Otsego, right at about Otsego. Tedesco is the section that runs east-west. I believe anything west of there, entire section shown in green is Lafayette.
Where is the community garden on there?
Community garden, I don't know.
Seriously?
Yeah, there's one on the
I think it's
north side of the street. Triangle.
Is it?
And there's a screen behind to your right as well.
Is it at the park?
The way to we
The
go.
way to
White up,
It's right in between at Sega and Weeda Park.
Thanks.
Alright, so it's only.
Yeah, I can see.
yes, sir.
This isn't about this project specifically, but Ruben, you mentioned coordinating with other entities, you know, so someone doesn't come in and tear up what you've done a year later. Do you feel like that's the case with these other entities? Do they try to coordinate with you when they do stuff as well, and around the city when projects?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I think they do because it's cheaper for them as well.
Okay.
If the city's already committed that we're committed to paying to rip the street up, then the utility company doesn't have to pay to rip the street up.
Right.
They have to pay to dig the hole to put their pipes in or whatever they're doing. But they save all of the costs associated with removing the old roadway surface and putting the new roadway surface down that the city picks up as part of our project. So it's much cheaper for them to coordinate their work as part of our project. We have pretty regular meetings with utility companies to match schedules, and they tell us what they're doing, and which informs our 5-year plan. We tell them what we're doing, which informs their plan.
And are you folks doing the path on by Shepherd Road, or is that another entity?
Path by Shepherd
It's a
Road.
bike walking path along Shepherd Road that runs west from downtown, and it goes up to Randolph, Otto,
Mm-hmm.
back down towards 35E. And I notice there's a lot of spray paint on the ground, like they're getting ready to do construction. I wonder if that's a city project or a county project, or who's doing that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know who's doing that work.
So, so will you have money for green stormwater infrastructure for this project, for tree wells and all that kind of stuff?
Yes.
Silva and Monticello's, whatever.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we are. So all of that, we don't know exactly what sort of stormwater management will be part of the project, but we are definitely required on every project to meet stormwater requirements. We work really closely with the watershed organizations to determine kind of what that is, but there are some pretty strict standards of stormwater that we are required to meet on all of our projects.
How heavy is the traffic on that, especially on Tedesco? I mean, do you know what the
I don't know off the top of my head. I think it's, I want to say 4,000 to 6,000-ish cars per day.
So could there be permeable pavement by any chance in that stretch of road, or?
We've never done that before. I can say we've never done that
Yeah.
before as a city. That's a question that I would probably have to kick to our pavement managers. I think the big question would be regarding the structural strength of permeable pavements. We've used on Jackson Street in our downtown project, we use permeable asphalt on the bike trail, but that's obviously
Right.
holding much lower loads than streets do.
There's permeable concrete.
Okay. This is part of what we call the MnDOT state aid roadway system, which means we receive some MnDOT or state funding to help maintain the roadway. Along with that comes requirements about the structural strength of the pavement that is required to hold. Sometimes, and sometimes those requirements are more stringent than we would choose to build as a local agency, but that's what comes along with receiving the state funding for it.
It'd be great if you could check into it.
Sure.
Do you think this will close both directions of traffic? Or
The bridge project almost certainly will.
Okay.
Yep.
Any other questions? Any questions for anybody on Skype? If anybody's typing, I'm not able to see it, so please turn on your mic if you can.
Did you say you have paper copies of that file?
I do. Yep. I have some good copies here.
That'd be great.
Grab one. All right. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Next up, we have Faye, who'll be talking about pedestrian and bicycle plans, mostly pedestrian-related activities.
Thanks, Melissa. Well, good afternoon. I'm Faye Seimer. I am the pedestrian safety advocate for the city of St. Paul. I was hired by the city about a year ago. It's a brand new role for the city. And so a big part of my job is to help us in Public Works identify how we can be more strategic and more proactive in advancing pedestrian safety and making St. Paul a safe and appealing place to walk for all. And so I'm here to talk about two major initiatives we have going on related to walking in St. Paul. The first is developing our first ever citywide pedestrian plan. And the second is an initiative to partner with our police department to step up enforcement of our state crosswalk law and make crossing the street safer for folks. So a little bit about St. Paul and our walking environment today. We have about 1,100 miles of sidewalk in the city. We replace about 6 to 8 miles annually. So that's saying that our reconstruction cycle is about 150 years. We have almost 400 miles of gaps in our sidewalk network, which means 400 miles of roads that don't have a sidewalk along at least one side of the road. About 50 of those miles are in locations on our parks, where we do have perhaps a regional trail along the road. So Mississippi River Boulevard is a great example where we have a regional trail on the west side and no sidewalk on the east side. So we can have a conversation about how high a priority we would think about each of those 400 miles, but that gives you a sense. And then, especially in the last couple of years, we've been really seeing a spike in our annual pedestrian crashes. This is not unique to St. Paul. These numbers are going up nationwide as a percentage of total traffic injuries and deaths, but it's definitely something that we are paying attention to in St. Paul. And then just a little bit about crashes and why those, another way of looking at why those rates are concerning. On the left, we have census data on how residents of St. Paul commute to work. So about 80% commute by motor vehicle, and then about 18% walk or take transit. When you look at our crash statistics, that number of people who are involved in a crash while walking goes from 18% to 28%. So again, we're seeing an overrepresentation in crashes. So why have a pedestrian plan? Plans are really an opportunity to identify goals and community values, and then to set policies around them so that we can guide decision making. So for example, on the project Ruben was discussing, set some high-level criteria for how we as a city approach reconstruction of our streets and our bridges and design for pedestrians. It's also an opportunity to promote consistency in how we make choices. We as city staff hear from our residents all the time with requests for, can we do something to improve safety here? Can we have a crosswalk over here? And again, when we have that policy guidance in place, that allows us to respond based on that policy, and that allows us to be consistent and really helps advance our goals of equity, of knowing that we are responding in the same way to all areas of the city. Also, plans are always an opportunity to just start conversations and change culture, and we know that walking is something that everyone in St. Paul does at some point in their journeys, and this is an opportunity to talk about how we can make that safer for everyone. Some of the things that we hope to achieve with our pedestrian plan, one is to build capacity to support safe walking everywhere in St. Paul, and capacity includes us as city staff. It includes our residents so that they know how to contact city staff, they know how to drive and walk safely, and it also includes our policymakers who are ultimately making decisions about the funding we have available to make pedestrian safety improvements. I've already talked about the importance of having proactive policies to make our safety improvements equitable. We're also looking to develop priorities for investments in walking based on equity and safety, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how we'll be doing that. Another component, it isn't just about what we build, it's about how we support education and enforcement and encouragement, and all these other components to advance walking, and again, to just promote and energize a culture of walking here in the city. Big reveal, we just had a steering committee meeting last week, and taking in some of the public input that we heard, we have prepared our vision for the plan. Hot off the presses, our vision is that St. Paul is a walking city and that we are more healthy, connected, and resilient when walking is safe and appealing for all. A little bit about the products we'll be developing in the plan to help advance that vision. One is we'll be developing high priority pedestrian areas in St. Paul. And so we've had a community input process that I'll go through in a minute to ask people about what's important to them around questions of equity, safety, demand, health, and comfort. And we can use GIS mapping to show how those different factors that people think are important, where they are located in our city. And this is an example from Indianapolis where when you overlay all of those together and weight them, you end up with high, medium, and low priority pedestrian need areas for the city. And so that's something we'll be developing, or are developing right now for St. Paul.
Faye, can I ask a clarifying question? Who owns or is responsible for maintaining sidewalks in St. Paul?
When it comes to snow and ice removal, adjacent property owners are responsible for making sure that sidewalks are clear.
What if there's like a crack in the sidewalk? Is that the property owner?
We repair all sidewalks as a city. So when I said that we replace 6 to 8 miles annually, that is what I was talking about in terms of addressing where we have, cracks or, other surface issues.
Is that assessed then to the homeowner?
Repairs are not assessed.
Okay.
Sure.
We had a conversation about
Yeah,
it.
I know.
Our assessment policies are kind of changing as we speak as a result of a change in the way the city was able to collect right-of-way maintenance fees. So there was a legal ruling about that came out last spring. And so over the course of the past year, working with our city council, our public works leadership has been identifying new ways to assess for sidewalks. So if I sound like I'm not 100% sure, it's because it's still evolving. So another thing that we'll be developing through the plan is crosswalk site evaluation guidelines. And so I mentioned that there's a lot of questions out there from community members and from our elected leadership of what can we do to make the street safer for people to cross, and where do we put crosswalks and why, and how do we decide whether to just put paint down or to put paint and flashing lights or additional signage. And there's a lot of guidance out there from peer cities and from the Federal Highway Administration that we've been reviewing. This is an example from Portland, and what's nice about it is I think it's a pretty transparent way to show folks the factors that go into these decisions, and it's a great tool for city staff to be consistent, and it's a great communication tool to have with residents and with elected officials about how those choices are made. So we'll be developing something similar for St. Paul. And then also in the plan, we'll also be looking at funding availability and funding needs. So I've already made some allusions about our replacement schedule of our sidewalk network. And so the plan is an opportunity to have a conversation about what might it look like to repair on a cycle faster than every 150 years in our sidewalks, as well as programmatic capacity in terms of how we support other efforts that we're undertaking with our staff time, like Safe Routes to School and our Stop For Me campaign, to enforce their crosswalk law. And as I mentioned, it's not just about what we build, but it's about the programs that we sustain as well. So we have spent this spring conducting a big outreach phase to hear from community members about what's important about walking in St. Paul. And so for this next bit of the presentation, I will be sharing some highlights from that. Did anyone in this room take our survey? I'm curious. All right. Okay, so a couple folks are familiar with that. I actually met Melissa at our open house last March. So that was another opportunity to hear from folks about the plan. I was really thrilled with the response rate to our online survey. We heard from 2,800 folks about walking in St. Paul. I also spoke to another 1,500 or so people during Safe Summer Nights and other community festivals last summer as I was preparing for the plan. We also had kiosks up in local libraries to help get the word out and give people a quick way to provide input. And I was also able to meet with targeted groups of folks that we know don't typically respond to surveys or show up at open houses, and so I was able to reach out to a class of English language learners to hear from some new immigrants about what their experiences in St. Paul are as they walk, as well as the Teen Advisory Council at Skyline Towers in the Midway neighborhood, along with some seniors in the Hamlin Midway neighborhood and some of our public housing residents as a way to bring some more voices into our results. So I'll be talking as I go through these about what we heard from those groups as well. So as I mentioned, we had about 2,800 responses to our survey. We did use Facebook to advertise a survey that accounted for about 1,000 of our responses. Which leaves me pretty pleased to know that just through our city communication network, we heard from about 1,800 folks that way. We analyzed all the responses based on demographic variables just to see if there are any differences in the ways people experience walking in St. Paul based on their zip code, based on their race, based on their age, based on their common form of transportation, whether they typically walk or bike or take transit. And based on their income. And so as I go through our overall results, where there were interesting things in the demographic variations, I'll call them out, but the full cut of those responses are available on our website. So the first question was, why do you walk in St. Paul? And this was really consistent across every demographic variable. The top reason people listed is to improve their health and get exercise, and to enjoy the outdoors and get fresh air. And then third, to get to daily destinations like work, school, etc. And what I took away from this is really the universal appeal that walking has. So these are just some responses to our question of why do you like walking in St. Paul, and I think it really shows you the diversity of reasons. Health and recovery from brain surgery, able to get home with winter weather, it's calming and I have no other choice, but I like it, to see what's going on. St. Paul is where I was born and raised. I love to walk in St. Paul because it has nice people and great communities. And I really loved, again, I want to stress that this is a cross-section of responses that I heard across demographic groups. So I just want to say that I think walking is really something that we all share, and that it's important to everyone in St. Paul. So a little bit about why walking is important to you. No big surprise, land use matters. So folks in downtown St. Paul were much more likely to tell us that they walk to get to daily destinations, whereas folks in Highwood Hills, one of our most low-density neighborhoods of our city, were more likely to walk for exercise or health. Just realized, less likely to walk. When we looked at these results by income, people in our lowest income brackets were more likely to walk to get to daily destinations, whereas folks, as we went up the income scale, walking for health or exercise tended to be a more popular response. Back to our previous discussion, when we asked folks what are the top 3 things that would make walking safer and easier for you, number 1 was improving snow and ice removal on sidewalks. Number 2 was improving ways to cross busy streets, and number 3 was adding sidewalks to streets without sidewalks. Again, of all the different ways we looked at the responses, generally across all folks, our top 2 of the 3 remain the same, of improving snow and ice removal and improving crossings of busy streets. And then I thought it was interesting that people who said they most commonly drive, bike, or take transit had adding sidewalks as their next top priority, whereas people who most commonly walk had, repairing cracks in the sidewalks as their top. And so I think people who walk know where there are sidewalks and they know their routes, and they're probably very well aware of the conditions, whereas maybe people who walk less frequently, are kind of stymied by gaps in our network. Again, across all racial categories, those top 3 remained consistent, but we did see that street lighting and adding sidewalks were more important for folks of color, and so that's starting to tell us that people are experiencing walking a little bit differently in St. Paul. Another question is, choose the top 3 locations where it is most important to you to improve walking. So those were along and across busy streets, areas of the city that lack sidewalks, and neighborhoods whose residents rely on walking the most. And so I was saying at the beginning that part of what we're doing through this process is developing a map of where our high priority pedestrian need areas are in St. Paul. And it's really based on this input because all of these locations that people were describing are places that we can show on a map. It's really using this input that we're relying on to help weight how we would prioritize something like along and across busy streets or streets connecting people to light rail stops. And we're going to be assigning weights to each of those categories based on what we've heard from folks through this feedback. So again, looking at how people responded differently, connecting to grocery stores was most important for respondents under 20 with incomes below 20,000, whereas people with annual incomes above 120,000 were more interested in connecting to schools. And again, folks in the lowest income bracket were also more interested in seeing improvements in neighborhoods with higher health risks. So again, as I mentioned, I did have an opportunity to talk with some folks that I didn't anticipate hearing from as much in our survey about what their experiences are like walking, and we're using this to as well in our steering committee to think about how we weight the responses in our survey. So I heard a lot from folks about personal safety concerns, and just some of the examples that when I was walking around Skyline Towers near the Hamlin light rail stop, just some of the things the teens were pointing out to me was just litter in their neighborhood, and what is it like to walk to Target and have just litter on the side of the street. So that's something that that they were seeing. Another concern of theirs was weird people, and those are their words, but again, those feelings of personal security that people have when they're walking really vary in the city. Also asked folks about what's it like crossing roads. And I think, going into this at our perspective as Public Works is we were really focused on, 4-lane busy roads and how do we get people across them. But thinking about just the experiences that people have, if you think about Skyline Towers next to our Hamlin Midway Target, the driveway into Target probably has as much traffic as many intersections in our city, but we treat it like a driveway, not like a crosswalk or an intersection. And so just thinking about that's the experience that we're having, and that might not be captured in our data otherwise. Also talking to some of our new immigrants and hearing from folks about just the importance of education and not just teaching drivers to stop for pedestrians, but hearing from folks that they're not really sure what it means when you press the buttons at the stoplights and what's supposed to happen and who's supposed to go. And frankly, it can be confusing. Sometimes you press a button and nothing happens, and so understanding signals and lights was something I heard from folks. And then just I was in particular showing them a picture of Rice Street, and I asked, well, how would you get across this after you get off the bus? And a woman was like, I grab my kids' hands and I run fast, and just just a lot of discomfort with using our road system.
So I have a question. So I'm wondering if the issue is really they're not understanding how this stuff is supposed to work, or if it needs to work consistently. Because I walk a lot and I use those traffic signals, and you press some and they don't work. And others, it does a countdown and then it still stays green for a while, and others it instantly changes to yellow. And maybe it's, if there were a consistent way that it worked, people would pick up on that and wouldn't need it.
Yeah, I agree that the system is not intuitive, and that it's probably harder for new immigrants, but I don't think that that's the only issue going on. And then lastly, I just want to stress that the health and the mental health benefits of walking were important for everyone, and that even folks who are walking on a daily basis to buy groceries or get their kids to school, and it's really part of their transportation, are telling us that walking is an important way for them to access health benefits and to get out in the fresh air. And I think that's a really powerful finding. So as I mentioned, our next step is to take what we've heard and use that to think about how we will prioritize our investments in walking in St. Paul. And so as I mentioned, all of these different things that we've been asking people about can be layered together on a map, and that we as a steering committee will be assigning weights to those based on the feedback that we've heard from the public. And then we'll be able to create a map much like these examples from Indianapolis, showing where our high priority areas are in St. Paul to be investing in pedestrian projects.
Is the blue one just overlaid of the two?
Exactly. So you take a set of criteria like equity, which in this region we have a great definition from the Met Council in terms of concentrated areas of poverty where 50% or more of residents are residents of color, overlaid with things like health, which we can measure by things like rates of obesity, rates of heart disease, asthma, diabetes. We can assign each census tract in the city a score based on how they do on these measures, and then weight the different measures to come up with an overall score for the city. We'll be spending...
Sorry. I was just wondering if you could point out a few of the high priority areas on there. I was trying to look at them fast enough.
This is an example from Indianapolis.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, never mind.
So in fact, I can't.
No,
I'm not very familiar with the region.
That doesn't look...
But our process is going to be very similar. Okay. We will be continuing to develop this plan throughout the summer. We have a steering committee of public works leadership, of our elected officials, representatives of agency partners, of our citizen reps from our transportation committee helping to shape the plan. We hope to have a draft available this fall and to have it adopted by our city council this winter. We'll have another public open house in the fall to share the draft plan and hear from folks about it as we continue to develop it. There are no more questions about the pedestrian plan. I'd like to switch gears and talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing this summer to enhance, as I said, this culture change in terms of making St. Paul a place where pedestrians are safe walking and that drivers stop for pedestrians.
I'm sorry, Faye, I do have a question about the plan.
Go ahead.
And this is about community input and how much weight that has. And do you have a plan in place prior to going out? I mean, you must have something in place when you go out to the public and then you ask for feedback from them. And I guess my specific question, because this is happening in Minneapolis where I live right now, about their comprehensive plan 2040. And in my neighborhood, there's a lot of pushback on it. And I'm wondering if a certain area objects to parts of your plan or any part of your plan, do they actually have any power or voice with the input in terms of what you're doing, or is it kind of a foregone conclusion that you're going to implement certain things regardless of, you know what I'm saying? Like where I live, it's they don't want to see like fourplexes go up in their neighborhoods, for example. And I'm all for the city's plan, but the people, a lot of my neighbors are not for that plan. And I'm wondering if in St. Paul, folks who push back like that are kind of like not in my neighborhood type stuff, or not in my backyard. Do they actually have any power to reject the plan and say not here, or is that maybe too deep? Or
So this is a plan to set, high-level priorities and strategies for the city, and I think a lot of times when we hear reactions from folks, it's really about specific projects, and we won't be identifying any specific projects through this plan. A lot of what we're trying to do is look at our existing resources and rethink about, how do we invest those resources where we know they'll have the greatest benefit, and how do we, as a community, define our values so that we have a shared expectation of what the greatest benefit would be.
So you're not down to that level yet?
We're not, no. I mean, another reason that our city council members have legislative aides, all sitting on the steering committee for this plan, is that we want to share with folks as we're going along how it's being developed and get that input now in terms of kind of where our elected leadership is in terms of, I've asked them to give me comments as we're developing our vision and goals of, how aggressive, how strong, or how weak do you think these statements should be, so that we are developing a plan that hopefully is implementable as we go forward.
That seems very smart. I was at a meeting last night in Minneapolis, and there's a lot of contention, and people think that they weren't given enough information early on, which is always a bad idea if you don't do outreach early on like you're doing.
It's a challenge in the planning field, and we can do as much as we can to make information available to people, and we know that there will always be people for whatever reason, weren't able to reach at that time, and
yeah, and that's exactly what happened. Okay, thank you.
So the Stop For Me campaign is a partnership between community members, the St. Paul Police Department, as well as St. Paul Public Works, and it's really to enforce our state's crosswalk law, which says that drivers must stop for pedestrians who are crossing the street as long as that there is a reasonable distance for them to stop safely. And so this initiative started about 5 years ago, and it started with community members community members just with a banner walking through crosswalks in our city to raise attention to drivers going by about the importance of stopping for people. This led to a partnership with our police, who were actually able to come and issue citations during those events, and now the current evolution is that our police department actually sends an officer in plain clothes through the intersections, and then they issue citations to drivers who don't stop for pedestrians. And then the locations where we do these campaigns are based on community requests. So Melissa is organizing one in her neighborhood, and community members often walk with the officers and help educate other folks on the street about how to cross safely. What's exciting about this initiative this year is that we are partnering with the University of Minnesota, and we have the opportunity to actually measure before and after data on how many drivers in St. Paul stop for pedestrians in our crosswalks. And we're going to be doing some heightened enforcement and education events this summer, and we're going to be able to see if there is a change in our culture and in stopping for folks. This U of M research team has done another study like this in Gainesville, Florida, Gainesville started with a yielding rate of around 30%. So for every one time that someone tried to get across a crosswalk, there were 2 other times when a driver didn't stop for them. A year later, they were up at about 90%. And a year after, like even when they were no longer doing these enforcement events, it was still up at 90%. And so I think this is a really exciting opportunity in St. Paul to really move this needle in terms of our culture of stopping for people. You know, I've already been over this, but this is a concerning issue in terms of the rising percentage of pedestrian fatalities that we're seeing in our overall crash statistics. And so this is something we're taking very seriously and addressing. And so the way that this campaign and the study is working this year is we have 16 sites in the city. This is an example of 4 of them. They're all locations where we have marked crosswalks. None are at signals, just because of the way the enforcement works. It's difficult for the officers to set up at a signalized intersection because they get hung up on the red lights. And so they're all marked crosswalks at unsignalized intersections in the city. The U of M research team has already been walking through all of these crosswalks this spring to collect our before data, and they're coding cars that don't yield. And then an important thing that they're coding is what's called a multiple threat. So that's when, you know, you're walking across, let's take that Dale Street example. You're walking across one lane of traffic, the first car stops for you, and then that second car pulls around or doesn't stop, and now you're stuck in the middle, like on that lane line, kind of in between cars. So that's what's called a multiple threat pass, and this is an especially dangerous situation for pedestrians to be in. So that's one of the things that they're coding. So far they did about 1,600 crossings, and the average yielding percent is about 30% in St. Paul right now. Some of the good news is that they're also measuring how far back cars stop for people. The good news is most cars are stopping pretty far back, and that's really important when we're talking about these multiple threat crashes I was just describing, because when that first car stops far back, that gives that second car in that other lane much more room to see the pedestrian, and it gives people more room to see cars that could be coming, and so that's a really safe driving practice that we're promoting. And so the good news is that generally that culture is there in St. Paul when people do stop. But as you can see, when they were looking at just the different situations folks could be in when they're crossing the road, a multiple threat pass is, again, when that car pulls around. Multiple threat hard braking is when they pull around and then like brake really hard so they still stop, but it's, you know, it's still scary. Multiple threat passes are by far the behavior that we're seeing drivers do that's causing the most danger to pedestrians. These are the 16 intersections that I mentioned. The red intersections are the intersections where our officers will be doing additional enforcement this summer and fall. The green intersections are, well, actually the red and the green intersections are intersections where our U of M team is collecting data on yielding to pedestrians. And so what's going to be interesting is whether we see changes in these green intersections, meaning that that we are changing the culture, that drivers are becoming more aware of as a result of our work, and that yielding is going up even in places where you don't have the extra enforcement. So as I mentioned, we will be enforcing these crosswalk safety at these intersections all summer. So we will be doing that in 4 waves. We just had our first wave wrap up, and officers issued warnings, not tickets, because we're trying to get the word out, and they spoke with over 1,000 drivers who were pulled over for not stopping for folks in crosswalks during those 2 weeks. Starting in June, officers will be issuing citations, and then we'll be continuing in August and October with additional waves, again, keeping that awareness up. Something that is interesting and that we're doing differently this year, when officers issue citations, there's a box that says on the citation, endangerment. And due to this multiple threat issue, officers who see a driver making a multiple threat pass, like pulling around a vehicle that's stopped for a pedestrian, will now be checking that endangerment box on citations. And those drivers will have to appear in court. So they won't be able to pay a fine. Well, they'll still have to pay a fine, but they will also have to go to court to plead their case before a judge. So that's a change that's coming this year in how St. Paul Police will be enforcing that law. Some other things that we'll be doing, so again, we're kind of building on more awareness activities, and so in June, August, and October, officers will be enforcing the law, but in August and October, we'll be adding additional signage to these 8 intersections, again, to help build awareness and to encourage folks to get yielding rates up, and as I said, this has been really effective in Gainesville, where this team has worked. So with that, I think I'll wrap up because I have a feeling folks might need to get back to their desk, but I'm happy to continue the conversation and take any questions from folks.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Ruben.
Thanks for coming.
One of these, if you're interested.
And for folks still on Skype, I'll take a couple copies, scan them, and you can email me if you want a copy.
Just one quick question. If we want to find out who like a project manager is on a certain project,
Thanks, everyone.
how do we do that? Just go to the city webpage, or?
So generally, we will only have project managers identified for the current year projects, maybe 1 year in advance. We haven't named project managers for anything out here. Even our 2019s are pretty fuzzy at this point.
You know, I'm thinking like that, the Shepherd Road thing.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, when it's going to be closed and for how long.